Hello, and welcome to Scott's Odyssey. Broad Top, Pennsylvania is an area full of interesting history. I mean, they have the oldest operating railroad, they have the electric trolley museum, and a giant 40-foot long snake that eats pigs, cows, and chickens. Yeah, see you in a minute. Welcome back. If you've watched my videos before, thank you for your patronage, and if you're new to Scott's Odyssey, welcome aboard. Rock Hill, Pennsylvania, home to narrow gauge trains, electric trolleys, and yes, according to history, 40-foot long black snakes with yellow markings. No, we're not talking about the giant snake of Gettysburg, Devil's Den, but we'll touch on that later in this story. According to the Tyrone Daily Herald back in October of 1974, a full team of film crew for the NBC News visited this area seeking to prove out the haunt of an over 50-year-old story regarding a giant 40-foot long black snake. It was such a big deal that Arch Campbell, a well-known feature news reporter, went into this area and interviewed several locals who had claimed to have seen the snake, and a bunch of other locals to get their take on if the snake really existed or not. This all stemmed from multiple news articles that were written in the Broad Top Bulletin paper and echoed in the Huntington Daily News about Nick Kolenchak, an 80-year-old retiree of the Broad Top coal mine, telling his story from back in 1927 when he was 35 years old, along a dark old abandoned road between Hickory Hill and Saxton, an area where he lived in and was still living in. He heard some rustling in the underbrush and climbed up the bank of Saxton Mountain to see what was making the noise. According to Nick, he witnessed the biggest snake he had ever seen making its way down the mountainside. His estimation was that the snake was 18 to 20 feet long. Nick, being a local to this area, also made the decision to go back and look for the snake on future expeditions into this area. And wouldn't you know it, he found the snake on multiple occasions. Not only did Nick find the snake, but he was able to determine that the snake had a path it would follow. The path was a trough 4 to 6 inches deep and ran directly toward the Huntington and Broad Top Railroad tracks, just a short distance from today's Warriors Path State Park, and all the way back to Hickory Hill. Nick described the snake as wet slate gray with yellow around its neck and eyes. Donald Moore, a druggist, or what we now call a pharmacist, out of Saxton, was the next eyewitness to be interviewed. According to Donald, 15 years back, he and his father were out picking berries at an old coal mine near the Duval Cemetery in Broad Top Township. That's when they saw something moving down at a nearby mine gob or bony pile, a place where the waste material of bituminous coal mining is dumped, similar to, but not to be confused with the comb piles of anthracite mining. As the snake moved away from them, they witnessed that the entire top of the pile was moving with it. At their best estimate, the snake was about 40 feet in length. Next on the list was 63-year-old Mrs. Ollie Dorsey out of the Trough Creek Valley near Colfax. According to Mrs. Dorsey, 38 years ago, back in 1936, when she was a young lass of 25, the family had been renting a farmstead near the Juniata River between Ardenheim and Mill Creek. Mrs. Dorsey stated that while she was hanging clothes in the yard one day, she heard something in the grass. What she heard, she then saw, and stated it was the most horrifying thing that she had ever seen. Her description of what she saw was a snake that was over 16 feet long and as big as a washer top. She ran from the snake calling for her husband. The next part I don't quite understand. but apparently the snake crawled on top of a high cave located at the end of the porch and fell off due to its weight. Mr. Dorsey apparently went after the snake with an axe, and Mrs. Dorsey later discovered a large and bloody axe near where the snake had been, and a large head. She wasn't sure if the head was of the snake or not, but her husband wouldn't discuss the incident with her any further. They immediately relocated from the farm. Next up is Johnny Kulinchak, son of Nick. He took up the mission of his father, and while hunting ginseng roots near the old Heck mine, near the Duval Cemetery again, saw something black moving and heard rocks rolling on a slate pile. He could not clearly identify it due to heavy bushes, and left because he feared it to be a female bear and a cub. But when he returned the next morning, there were no bear prints, and the slate had been worn smooth as glass by something dragging on it. Johnny claimed the snake had been lying there a short distance away in a clearing, where it made a trail and the grass was pushed down. There are other, what I would call, third-hand stories, where people claim to have sat on a log only to find out it was a giant snake, or where it ate all the farmers' chickens, pigs, and even their pet cats. I don't know about the local times before this story broke in the 70s, but since then, there have been many more alleged sightings of this snake all around the Raystown Lake region. Maybe it's even possible that it's the origin of the Raystown Ray story. What? You don't know about Raystown Ray? The Loch Ness Monster of Pennsylvania that lives in a lake that's only been here since 1973? Well, I'm sure we'll get around to hearing about him in one of these videos. Similar stories about giant snakes have been told in Pennsylvania for a very long time. For example, according to an article written in September of 1881, where a snake was found at Round Top, just south of Gettysburg, by a man named Hiram Warren. Hiram claimed that the snake was 15 feet long. Now, this location is known as the Little Round Top, or more commonly, Devil's Den. Since the early 1800s, the rock formation was renowned for large timber rattler snakes. And back in that time, a timber rattler of 6 feet in length was probably not too uncommon. What? You didn't know they could get that big? Well, the modern average timber rattler gets about 60 inches or 5 feet in length. But the current record is held by a 6 foot 3 inch long one. And during a time when they were not being rounded up and had plenty of food available, I'm sure 6 feet was much more common. Regardless, the Devil's Den got its name because it had a lot of snakes. Although I cannot find the origin to the name's story, it's said that back in the 1830s, some boys were playing around the rock formation and came across a large black snake. No specific size was given, just a really large black snake. The boys called the snake the Devil. And well, God bless those Pennsylvania Dutch and their folk magic, mythical religious beliefs in the powwow and brauche. Anyway, the name stuck, and ever since this area is called the Devil's Den. And hey, maybe you would have been freaked out as a kid too, expecting to see a 5 or 6 foot long rattlesnake, and instead you come across a Pennsylvania black rat snake, which may have been found as big as 8 feet 5 inches in length. That's right, the black rat snake, which, because of the duplicity of the government agency, is now called the eastern rat snake, because I guess calling it black, which accurately describes its color, offended some white people doing cultural appropriations of herpetologists. It's a snake that modernly, on average, is a 7 foot long snake at adulthood. So using the same concept as before with the timber rattler, during the time these kids came across this snake, it may very well have been upward of 8 feet in length, which is pretty scary, even to me. But just like the other stories, it has morphed into this legend of a snake with monstrous proportions that lives only in that location and nowhere else. Just as a side note, these snakes have a typical roaming area of 30 acres, or about 23 football fields, to give you some perspective. And that 8 foot snake is still nothing compared to a reticulated python with a size cap of about 33 feet, and its cousin, the anaconda, with an alleged size of 79 feet, although nobody's ever measured one that large. And well, they all come from their ancestor of the Paleocene epoch, the Titanoboa, with an average size of 50 feet. But they went extinct 65 to 60 million years ago. The Titanoboa, not the reticulated python or anaconda, whom are doing quite fine today. So I dug deeper into the story of the broad-top serpent, and well, I ran into some issues with the story. The one told from Mrs. ODDYSEEy was the most annoying because, well, I could not find Mrs. ODDYSEEy or any Dorseys listed in Huntingdon County since the early to mid 1800s, including the family members that connect to the historic Dorsey House, more commonly called the Spear House in Huntingdon Borough. And the location given of her home in the Trough Creek Valley near Colfax, well, Colfax is quite a distance from the Trough Creek Valley. It's also claimed that the news reporter Arch Campbell's crew obtained this person's information by asking around at the Friendly Tavern with the question, "Have you seen a snake?" And if you've ever been to a local tavern in the boonies of PA, and no, I have not been to Friendly's Tavern, so I'm not speaking directly about it, but I've been to many of the taverns and corner overnight restaurants in the area, and I can tell you that these are not the places you go when you're an out-of-towner to ask townies weird questions. In the Dorsey story, the snake crawled on top of a high cave at the end of the porch. I honestly have no idea what this is intended to convey. If they were homesteading or micro-farming a piece of land between Ardenheim and Mill Creek, they would have been located on an extremely flat piece of silt land that floods frequently and has nothing even remotely resembling a cave or even a pile of large rocks. The story about Johnny Kolenchak hunting ginseng roots near the Old Heck mine in the Duval Cemetery works until the part where he saw something black moving and heard rocks rolling on a slate pile, but could not clearly identify it due to heavy bushes and left thinking it was a bear. Well, I find it curious that the article identifies him as an avid sportsman, which means if it was a black bear, even with a cub, he was in absolutely no danger from the animal and only needed to vocalize for it to go away. "Shoo, bear," and it'll go away. The other odd part of that piece of the story is he couldn't see or get there because of it being heavy with bushes, yet was able to get there the next day without pause, and then deduced that something wore the slate smooth as glass by dragging something on it. Which is kind of crazy because last I checked, snakes are not slimy, nor wet, nor have any special ability to polish the matte finish of slate or even shale. As a matter of fact, I can't even imagine anything that makes slate smooth as glass except maybe wetting it, and that only lasts for a minute or two. Either way, the final piece of putting this story to rest was the fact that the article claimed that this story was going to be aired in January of 1975 on national television by NBC with a huge reveal of what was found out about this Pennsylvania super snake. And well, it never happened. According to NBC and the NBC Regional News Center in Washington, D.C., who managed all of this, they have no record of this story. And well, I haven't gotten a response from local WJAC, although I'm not sure I shot the email off in the right direction for a response from them, but it also wasn't their story. They're just the local branch of NBC. In the end, we are left with no viable witnesses, no pictures, no drawings, no grand national television breaks in the news about a viable cryptid, and no remains nor remnants of a giant snake. Not even a shed skin. When I dug as deep as I could dig into the stories about giant snakes on the East Coast, I did come across one very interesting story, which is probably where Hiram Warren stole the idea to become infamous and tell people about a giant snake on Round Top. Hiram Warren told his story on September 25th of 1881. Curiously enough, on September 10th of 1881, a story was run in the Boston newspaper, The Pilot. It was titled One More Snake Story, and it was the tale that mimics the commonality between all of these other snake stories. As the story goes, I want to tell you how my child's life was saved up in the mountains the other day, said an old farmer who came into the appeal office yesterday. You don't mind an item with a snake in it, do you? Hearing no reply, the old man continued. Last Tuesday I was coming down from the lake with my little girl. When I stopped the horse and got out to get a drink at a spring my bottle having given out, while I was drinking, the horse got frightened and dashed down the road with the child in the wagon. I only have 12 girls, sir, and wouldn't spoil the set for worlds. Well, I gave up the horse and child for lost, but I followed them up and presently found the horse right on the edge of a precipice at a dead standstill. He couldn't move an inch. When I got closer, I thought that a strap had caught around his fetlock and one end had caught around a tree. I went to pull on the strap and jumped about 10 feet, for bust me clear open if I wasn't scared. A rattlesnake that was holding the horse was what was found. He had wound his tail around the horse's leg, and his neck was turned 3 times around a sapling, and his teeth were fast in the wood. He was 12 feet long, sir, for I measured him right then and there. A few pounds more strain would have snapped the snake clear in 2. I got the horse away from the precipice, and I might as well tell you the whole truth. The snake wasn't over 5 feet long, for when I took the strain off, he came right back to his natural size. You know how elastic a snake is. And the child is 4 years old and wasn't frightened in the least. If you put this item in the weekly, send me 4 copies. I want them for relatives in the East. The story was originally told in the Carson City, Nevada Appeal newspaper. And I did a little more digging, and as it would turn out, Hiram Warren was originally from out west. And there appears to be a significant number of Warrens in Nevada during the mid to late 1800s. This is essentially what I believe to be the origin story of the broad-top serpent, maybe even the serpent at Devil's Den. I may be wrong, but the evidence sure does seem to shed a lot of light on the whole of the story. If you enjoyed learning about the broad-top serpent, give the video a like. Take a moment to subscribe for more ODDySEEy histories, share the video out to people that you think might be interested, and leave a comment below with your thoughts about giant snakes or other Pennsylvania cryptids. As always, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Thank you.